Poverty Department, we make art with the Skid Row community. We instantiate that the Skid Row community is a community. It's a neighborhood like any other. The same rights, the same assets, the same value as any other community in Los Angeles. So we're very proud to be hosting this exhibition because, as you might imagine, we have a lot in common with the work that's been done with this project and with the Echo Park Collective. So I don't want to bog down the program, but I just want to say that we have an archive at the Skid Row History Museum and Archive, and we will be preserving and making publicly available all the material from this exhibition and all of the documentation that was gathered by the team. So just keep that in mind. After the exhibition is closed, it closes the end of March. After that, there's still plenty of time for scholars, students, friends, family, community members to come by and take a look at all the work that's been gathered by the team here. So I think those are all the important things. I just wanted to welcome everyone, and I hope you come back. You come back when you have time to peruse the exhibition, and I hope you come back after this exhibition because there are always really cool exhibitions and community programs going on. There's a calendar in the back. We have programs here almost every night of the week now. They're all free and they're all welcoming to everyone. So thank you very much. Without anything else, I'm going to introduce Ananya from Luskin.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ananya Roy. I am a professor at UCLA and director of the UCLA Luskin Institute on Inequality and Democracy. For those of you who were here at the opening of the exhibition, I spoke in lengthy fashion, and I will not do that this evening because we have an incredible panel, and I would like to turn it over to the panelists very soon. For those of you who were not here at the opening, this public program is a part of the exhibition Tents and Tenants after Echo Park Lake, and a big shout out to the After Echo Park Lake Research Collective as well as the After Echo Park Lake Archive Collective. We are so grateful that the work of the Archive Collective has found a home in the Skid Row History Museum and Archive, and we are also grateful to continue to journey with the LA Poverty Department in the work that we do. I'm especially thrilled that we are going to be able to have a panel this evening focused on the theme Tenants in the Streets. That is a phrasing that Will Sense Jr., who's been a part of both collectives, came up with. And by Tenants in the Streets, Will is inviting us to think about unhoused tenants, but also about tenants living under precarious conditions who mobilize fearlessly and constantly and remind us of the long arc of struggle in cities such as Los Angeles. And in particular, this exhibition is an invitation and provocation for us to think across different forms of tenancies and to think about unity in struggle, especially in difficult times. So our panel will be introduced and moderated by Pete White, founder and director of the LA Community Action Network. And LA does not need an introduction to folks who have gathered here in Skid Row. I will say again, the Institute and I personally am so very grateful to have had and continue to have LA as a movement teacher since our inception in 2016, along with the LA Poverty Department, along with Unión de Vecinos, and many other movement elders in the room. And I'm also very thrilled to be able to hand this mic over to Lupita Limon Corrales, who is a poet, organizer, founding member of the Echo Park Lake Local of Latu, and also currently activist in residence at the UCLA Luskin Institute on Inequality and Democracy. And Lupita is going to get us started, will root us, inspire us, and I want to turn it over to Lupita.
Hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's good to see so many familiar faces. Will it be okay if I close this for a sec?
Yes. It's gonna have to be fun.
I think it's gonna be fine. I think we'll survive. I'll be reading a few poems. Where's my timekeeper at?
Over here.
Okay, sweet, thank you. And each of these poems, it was really hard to narrow them down because there's a lot of folks in this room and on these walls and beyond who have inspired so much of my writing, and I wish I had more time, to be honest, to share all their stories with you all. But thanks for listening and holding these. Kerubin/Mohawk Street. Before Memo gets laid off, he works for decades in a factory making cherubs. Birthday after birthday, he gifts cherubs. They hang golden on the walls of the apartment. I meet Memo fighting his eviction. His daughter says, "Look, Ma," and shows her mother my tattoos, cherubs chasing one another across my arm. The morning of the march, Lulu prays, and it's God who lights the concrete path where she blocks traffic, like it was God who taught her to flip tables. She knocks doors at home, and she knocks doors for St. Teresa at the church next to her home. ¿A quién le tendremos miedo si hay solo un juez? What appears lucky or foolish is perhaps an answered prayer. We pray to love the angels more than we fear the devil, and then we see the angels everywhere. Earth Debt. The spider's web is a home and a trap. Tommy Orange. My home is my home and my cashier's check. Each hour I spend working to pay for the roof over my head, which leaks, by the way, every time it rains, is an hour I don't teach my children to swim, watch the agave plant grow its death spear, or allow myself to feel outrage for this stillborn world. Every hour I spend indoors is an hour I don't spend outside with the breeze and the butterflies. I mean burnt and dehydrated as the sun boils concrete. If I work hard, maybe I deserve it. God forbid I miss the paycheck or fall ill in the death trap we've made of Mother Earth. If it's illegal to exist in public, then it's either jail or haunt the vacant houses. If I lose my home, why won't you share the street and sky? There are no human rights, but there are human obligations. You pay your landlord's debt when your neighbor is yours to keep. Como perro sin dueño. After the divorce, my mom moves into the party supply store. She bathes in a storage box with an electric tea kettle and does her evening stretches between the piñatas. In the morning, she cleans the spinach plant where her primas in quality control wear lab coats and goggles and where nobody speaks English. After work, watching the rain from inside the glass store, she FaceTimes her long-distance lover. She doesn't get scared. She loves being alone, minus the muffled voices of the men who make their tents on the rooftop each night. Nobody understands why. Nobody understands why she'd end up somewhere and enjoy it. Bunker Hill, but the landlord loses. The morning Lupi wins her eviction, we scream in the court elevator up to the rooftop where she said she would jump a few weeks prior. Jacob wears a lawyer's suit and a hammer and sickle on his sun hat, and Silali arrives late to hear the good news. The priest who made a prayer for Lupi every day for 9 days asks that we stop at the cathedral on our way down the hill and light a candle to Saint Viviana, the patron saint of LA, to which Wesley says, slay. Then Phoebe adds that she's the patron saint of hangovers too. We walk 2 blocks to La Cita instead and wait for the bar to open, holding Sarah on both sides because it hurts when she walks, But it's a nice stroll through downtown, Lupi says, remembering childhood with their mother. Walking past a journalist, we yell, "Hey, we overturned the eviction." And she yells back, "I know, I heard," even though it just happened, and even though we interrupted her work meeting. We order 4 Bloody Marys, 2 mimosas, and 1 Virgin Shirley Temple with the fundraiser money, and laugh in disbelief. Sarah was once a bullfighter in Guadalajara, now a time traveler stuck in the present, still a big sister to Lupi, who still fights all their childhood fights. They might live in their house for another 61 years, and there will be lots of fighting, and there will be lots of parties too. Housing and other verbs. And this was written as we did a lot of research, as Lupi did a lot of research to turn her house into a historic monument. When the mother on Everett receives her eviction notice, her heart sinks to the bottom of her toes, bones buckling under the weight. Think splintered wood and broken plaster. Think the luxury apartments they're erecting next door. With enough pressure, everything collapses. A landlord is a parasite, and to a landlord, you're a roach. In other words, when the world ends, we'll keep crawling. Inside infested homes, a child tiptoes between us and her mother makes it magic. They're your tios, mija, coming by to say hi. Roaches wave at me from the sink and under the fridge. The last family in Chavez Ravine said they'd have to drag them out, and they did, feet first and screaming. Let the records show they fought back behind barricaded doors. Let the records show their daughter slapped a cop. Still, the bulldozers creeped in, TV screens lit like a twisted baseball game. On Sunset, my neighbors drape a blue banner over their brick wall. People would die for the Dodgers, and do. People would die to touch each other, to celebrate, to belong to something bigger, in the traffic, fireworks, and street fights, in the rare intimacy of strangers, like protest or like church. Why don't they play ball in the mayor's yard, not ours? Why don't you fight something other than each other? Why don't we replace Dodger spirit with class solidarity, abandon stadiums for unfenced parks, let our cheers flow across the valleys, hijacking the lonely nights? There was another world before here, a sycamore tree that survived fires and floods for centuries but couldn't survive construction. In her place, a freeway on-ramp. In every place, a freeway on-ramp, promising to connect us by burying our houses like fossils and driving us further apart. A house is crushed and its life evaporates to open space. Walk down the street, then look up. Someone used to make love in that sky. Walk east a few miles and you'll see my latest home with a notice on its door. Walk a few more years and there's nothing left to point to, just green fences and scaffolds and dust. Oh, I want to read more, but I'm going to end with this one. This last zine is included, or this last poem is included in copies of a zine I made for our friend Queen. And they're free, and there's a little code on the back if folks want to shoot a few bucks. It all goes to her family and to her children, one of whom's here with us today. And you can open it up and it'll be in another language on the other side. So we have it in English on one side and Spanish on the other. And there's some outside and then some when you walk right in. For Queen. When your mother says life is suffering, the correct answer is to bow your head, not to challenge her that suffering is beautiful. Our mothers love us, so they ask us not to suffer, so we suffer like fireworks instead. Queen, cool and intimate in the passenger seat, looks so pleased to be looked after. She sings, "Baby, those days are gone," holding nothing in her hands today. A poet told me once that friendship isn't linear, so I trace a thread back to a longing from girlhood, speaking in song lyrics, cruising with the windows down. They don't make longing like this anymore, or home with its comforts and traps. On a walk around the lake, we pushed a stroller past the trees Queen whispered to all childhood, past the lawn 400 cops trampled, past the ghosts of the chain link fence. We passed the street vendors, the single mothers, the circle of teens and their blunt. Past the undocumented, the unemployed, and the unhoused, in other words, the people of the city. You become a saint when your life is honored and your death keeps granting miracles. Queen always returned the lighter and always had more tricks up her sleeve. Our patron saint of eloteras and encampments and sacrifice, may we overcome our greatest fear of being extra. May the ones who walk all over us see the earth under their feet. May Echo Park live forever. May you be both its ground and sky.
Give one more round of applause for the pizza. It's a powerful moment, and when I listen to your poetry, I'm reminded that today is Nina Simone's birthday. And it would be Nina Simone who says an artist's duty is to reflect the times, as far as she's concerned. And so when I listen to your poetry, it is definitely steeped in the spirit of Nina Simone. And so thank you so much for your poetry. All right. So a couple of things. My name is Pete White. I'm your moderator tonight. And, you know, I'm your moderator, but I wish I was sitting in those chairs because I want to just take in all of the genius that we're about to hear tonight, facing y'all and not sitting next to y'all. But we'll get to that later. But before we get there, for folks in the audience, I heard some phones. Could you put your phones on silent or vibrate, please? Could you? Is that good? All right. The other thing, I mean, we are in the Skid Row Arts Museum, and, you know, in the spirit of struggle, we cannot be all in. We can't be like 50, 60 deep and quiet, right? And so we have to have this little interactive phase. And so if you believe that we are the people who have been steeped in and made for this moment, make some noise. If you believe that no individual is illegal, please make some noise. If you believe that we can push back against this coup that's rolling out in front of us right now, make a whole lot of motherfucking noise. And if you believe housing indeed must be a human right, make some noise. All right, I think y'all ready. I kind of like that. So check it, this is what we're gonna do. Because I'm gonna get out the way as well. I'm going to introduce, I'm gonna read everyone's description. And then we're gonna start with Deshony, everyone's bio. And then Deshony's gonna go for 10 minutes, and then the next speaker, and so on. We're gonna hold all the questions until the end. Is that all right? It's all right. I heard this, we got a little energy right here. Is that all right? Yeah. All right. So we're gonna hold the questions to the end. And you know, don't you hate being in that spot and someone says we're gonna hold the questions to the end and you never get to the audience questions? It generally happens that way. Tonight we're gonna make sure it does not happen that way. We're gonna open it up. But we're gonna get it kicked off. And so I'm gonna find my notes, and I'm gonna start with you, Lupita. You looked at me like, yes. I felt Lupita looked at me like, yes, start with me. All right. So here we go, y'all. And so Lupita Limon Corrales is a poet, artist, organizer, and language interpreter. Born in Sinaloa, Mexico, and raised in San Gabriel Valley. She comes from a long line of arboleros, theologians, homemakers, peasants, farmers, criminals, sounds like my family, factory workers, and cashiers who party on the weekend. She's a founding member of the Echo Park Local of the Los Angeles Tenants Union, organized by struggles to end evictions in Los Angeles and defend the caretakers of the oldest house in the neighborhood. Her writing can be found in dozens of zines and handmade books on Dublab and Lower, I'm going fast, Lower Long Read, Street Views, and a bunch of places. Put your hands together, y'all, for Lupita Limon Corrales. Introducing you, Lupita, I felt like I was introducing a fight. I felt like I was in a ring. I was like, let's get ready to rumble. Like, damn. I was going. All right, here we go. Now, this is just like my heart right here. She kept it brief on y'all, but she's not gonna keep it brief in these 10 minutes. Deshony Dozier. Deshony Dozier, born and raised in LA, is an organizer and scholar on police abolition and alternative urban development. She teaches at Claremont Graduate University and organizes with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Give it up for Deshony. And if we have time, I got stories about Deshony. All right, moving on down to Erin McElroy. Erin McElroy is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Washington, where their work focuses upon intersections of gentrification, technology, empire, and racial capitalism, alongside housing justice organizing and transnational studies. I'm gonna skip down just a little bit. Additionally, McElroy is co-founder of the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project, who I'm sure, man, a round of applause for that right there. It's data visualization, cartography, and digital media collective that produces tools, maps, reports, murals, zines, and a whole lot of other shit. Give it up for Erin McElroy. And then last, but truly not least, we have Annie Powers. Annie Powers is an organizer with the downtown local of the LA Tennis Union. She formerly organized with the unhoused community at Echo Park Lake with Streetwatch LA. She is also a PhD candidate in history at UCLA with advisor Robin D.G. Kelly. If you don't know, now you know. And she studies the long but overlooked history of houseless peoples, organized political struggles in the United States. Give it up for Annie, y'all. I think they're ready. Deshony, you on deck. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. I wish it wasn't this dark in here, but thank you for inviting me, Ananya and everyone. It's so good to be in space with y'all today. I'll be talking about encampments at the edge of the world. This is a picture from the Echo Park Lake encampment. And here what I'm really talking about is that encampments are important sites of political struggle because they reveal that we are at the end of what capitalist development can offer. They're important sites because they show that capitalism has made people's lives unbearable. And at the same time, they are incredible sites of survival where people come together and commune together and share resources. But we often stop here. We stop at this moment of encampments because they are often criminalized, evicted, and banished from space. But I want us to rethink that. I want us to rethink encampments beyond them as sites of community out of despair, and to imagine with encampments and how they produce otherworld making. My work has been investigating Skid Row activism since the 50s. My current book project, Another City is Possible, Skid Row and the Contested Development of LA, is investigating criminalization in Skid Row and how people have produced alternative visions of LA since the 1950s. Today I'll talk about a brief portion of that work and one example of encampment that we all probably have heard of but haven't done a deeper dive into, and that is Justiceville. Justiceville was a Black-led encampment that experienced serial displacement, but lasted in its sort of vision, its vision for cultural and political intervention for over 20 years. And I really want to stress that because instead of maybe thinking about the aftermath of Echo Park, we can think about Echo Park as a continuation of struggle, and we can galvanize this moment to continue on in the visions of Echo Park Lake encampment. Justiceville made various cultural and political interventions in transforming LA itself. Cultural interventions such as really reimagining the ways that people experience houselessness. Justiceville moved unhoused people and poor people out of the perception of destitution and criminalization. And people began to see unhoused people as agents of change through sites like through Justiceville. They were featured in various news outlets for their activism, but also caught the attention of Hollywood. They were featured on 227 on the concept of Black home. Their encampment community was sort of re-envisioned in the infamous sci-fi class warfare film, They Live. And then they also produced documentaries, and these documentaries, one called Justiceville, include songs and poetry, but the documentary itself also documented community in Justiceville, their eviction, and their larger plans for LA. So on the right, you see Ice-T and the leader of Justiceville, Ted Hayes, because the theme song of the documentary emerges out of LA's foundational hip-hop or emerging hip-hop culture, electro-hop, and Ice-T and Black rapper Roger Smith produced a song called Justiceville for this documentary. So Justiceville had a lot of cultural intervention, but they also had visions for political intervention. In particular, they really sought to reimagine LA through sustainable architecture and ultimately towards models for cooperative economic development. And I think this is really important when we think about how they tried to produce this in our landscape. In particular, they imagined a plan to solve homelessness, but really to solve the underlying problems of the cyclical nature of urban violence that leads to homelessness. And what they found is that actually everyone is caught up in what they called a quote unquote plantation rat race. And that we must imagine an alternative out of LA itself to embed alternatives in LA. So they came up with this plan called the Exodus Genesis Initiative Plan that envisioned these transitional land communities through sustainably built architecture, as well as collectively produce agriculture and aqua farms to be consumed by inhabitants of these communities as well as traded within LA. And really this again is a vision for not just unhoused people, but for all of LA. What ultimately ends up becoming of Justiceville is Dome Village on the road to this Egypt plan. And Dome Village was a 12-year, had a 12-year stint, thank you. It also, so part of how Dome Village came together was through private and also public funding. They got $250,000 from Arco Oil Company. They also got county and city funds to make it happen. And what they did was they leased a plot of land just outside of downtown LA, and they constructed these domes. They had communal living quarters, such as restrooms and bathrooms, or bathrooms and kitchens, and then a square of grass. And it lasted for 12 years, but there were some limitations in why they didn't get to their larger plan of Egypt, and part of it had to do with the politics of urban land and property here. One of the problems that they had was because of their funding and the need to pay for a ground lease rather than working towards collective ownership of land, they became susceptible to public funding, which had constraints on what their practices could be. And so ultimately, some of what happened with Justiceville Even though they planned to create more dome villages, it ultimately led to a transitional housing community, or really formed as a transitional housing community. Also, a lot of people might smirk in this room who knows Ted Hayes because he had problematic leadership at some point. The kind of values of cooperative economics fell, and he also started to adopt xenophobic ideas. In addition, he tried to run for office, run for mayor independent. And so his leadership really helped continue the visions of Justiceville and put them forth, but at the same time stifled its ability as well. But in general, the sort of landscape around urban land, collective ownership, was something that they did not really structurally intervene in, and it's something that we should think with today. So what can we learn from Echo Park? So this is a video, it's silent, but it's of Queen, Echo Park Lake encampment resident, who is also a long-term resident that I learned at this protest of Echo Park, who experienced serial displacement. And as a supporter on this day of their eventual eviction, I learned from Queen sort of the spirit of their activism, but also their call of us, which is that there are power in numbers to stop mass eviction, and there's a power in us to build out our capacity. But I want to pose a critical question to us here today, which is how can we imagine with Echo Park Lake, with Justiceville, with the many encampment communities in history, their visions for an alternative LA? What are the capacities that we can build out towards cooperative economics and otherwise in LA? And how do we see us all as part of that journey, as part of that vision for transforming LA? And moving outside of encampments as novel parts of the ruins of capitalism, but as important sort of vestiges or sites for liftoff into what alternatives or alternative urban development could be. And so how can we think with the history of our encampment communities more deeply and then enact it in our own work? And so this is a QR code, pull out your phones if you can. Socialists for All is doing a series of audio reads of various articles as part of this critical homeless studies syllabus, which I think maybe Annie was part of, I'm not sure. And so you can listen to an hour-long YouTube about some of the encampment communities that I traced in the 80s and the 90s right here. And I look forward to talking more today. Thanks.
Erin, do you need the lights off or on? You have slides?
I got slides, yeah.
You got slides? Give it up for Erin, y'all. I think it's another lights off situation at some point.
The slides aren't that important. Okay. All right. Yeah, you'll just kind of get like faded slides, but that's fine. Well, hi everyone. It's an honor to be here. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm also very short. Great.
Sorry, you don't want to and there's no regular
very loud, so hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, my name's Erin. This is my first time in this space. I don't live in Los Angeles. I never have. I feel like a bit of an imposter, but I'm really honored to be here. I've been really lucky to have been affiliated with the Institute for a number of years, and I'm co-founder of the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project, which has been around, I guess, 12 years now, starting, and I founded that in San Francisco. San Francisco is really my organizing home and where a lot of my thinking about housing justice, spatial and racial justice takes place. So I'm gonna be talking about some San Francisco examples today, but I also wanted to note that the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project has an LA chapter, and I've been so inspired by the work that they've done with some of you in this room. So I also am, I'm part of the Radical Housing Journal, and it's been an honor to be able to publish work from the After Echo Park Lake Research collected in the journal. This is an amazing article that many of you produced collectively, and I just wanted to note that I've taught it to students now for a couple of years, and a lot of my students are so inspired by it and take it to heart in their own work and organizing for spatial justice on the streets and in homes on the streets. So I'm really just honored to be here. Since I'm not that qualified to talk about context here in LA, I figured that in my very short reflection, I'm going to take a few steps back to theorize the carceral violence of the sweep, and in particular, the liberal logics that enshrine it up and down the West Coast. I live in Seattle. Most of my organizing is in San Francisco. Here we are in LA, so I'm thinking about the West Coast a little bit more broadly, and taking a couple steps back to think about some of the structures of violence that kind of lead us to organize in the first place. But I do think it's instructive to look at San Francisco, which has long been pathologized and heralded as the epicenter of West Coast liberal politics, and which time and time again has revealed the failures of liberalism, especially when it comes to housing and houselessness, and even that bifurcation as we often think about it. So while often celebrated as a liberal utopia, especially over the last few years, San Francisco has been rendered this failed city. This is kind of the new way that it's been talked about, caught up in some disastrous doom loop. And this is a 2020 piece by this journalist, Nellie Bowles, who wrote this article, How San Francisco Became a Failed City. And this is a quote from her, which is kind of hard to read, but she says, "San Franciscans tricked themselves into believing that progressive politics required blocking new construction and shunning those who came to town to code. We tricked ourselves into thinking psychosis and addiction on the sidewalk were just part of the city's diversity, even as the homelessness and housing prices drove out the city's actual diversity." This is what she's saying. "Now residents are coming to their senses. There's a limit as to how far we will let the decay of this great city go," unquote. So this is kind of the narrative that we're seeing taking over San Francisco these days. She's basically arguing that leftists, rather than like tech entrepreneurs or contemporary land monopolists, are the ones at fault, and that we don't really understand what's going on. If we just let new development happen, new development will solve the problem. And if we let a sort of tough on crime position take hold, that will also solve the problem. So she's really arguing here, as are many, for more police and more development. And this is the solution to what she's claiming to be this doom loop for this kind of failed city of San Francisco. And anti-capitalist organizers and abolitionists have, quote unquote, lost the plot. She writes that the city's become a ghost town of its former self, one marked by unhoused people aimlessly wandering the streets. This is like the dominant narrative that just kind of really came out of the pandemic, but also has a much longer legacy. And so she can't really claim originality for this framework. Before her article emerged, there was this book by Michael Schellenberger called San Francisco, Why Progressives Ruin Cities. His doomsday depiction of San Francisco, like Bowles' article, ridicules leftist organizers across West Coast cities for having prevented law and order from cleaning up the mess of houselessness. He continues to warn that this crisis will only spread east, and apparently this incursion will manifest civilization's end. This is actually the plot of this book. And it's kind of interesting. He is the current chair of politics, censorship, and free speech at this newly formed anti-woke University of Austin, which is like this new university. And it was actually founded by Bowles' wife, the conservative journalist Barry Weiss. So maybe you know. Yeah, this is I'm just, Anyway, so, but it is interesting that his position and Bowles' position aligns with liberal urban governments, right? Many eager to crack down on houselessness, including and especially following the 2024 Grants Pass versus Johnson Supreme Court ruling, which, as we know, effectively criminalized sleeping in public spaces. And if we're doing biographies, you might like to know that Nellie Bowles wrote this article. Her great-great-grandfather used to be, his name's Henry Miller, not the author, different Henry Miller. He was the cattle king of California, and at one point the largest landlord of all property in California, who also owned numerous mansions in San Francisco. So there we go. So his great-great-granddaughter's portrayal of San Francisco and other West Coast cities as rogue, dangerous arenas saturated with undisciplined vagrants not only maps upon his own, but also a broader pandemic-era discourse promulgated by these doom loop enthusiasts who love to kind of talk about this doom loop, right? For them, the crisis allegedly plaguing San Francisco and other cities is tethered not to the material loss that so many have experienced in pandemic and post-pandemic aftermaths, but rather they're deeply vexed that leftists continue to block their trickle-down economic solutions to creating new market rate and luxury housing to solve the crisis. Solutions that organizers like us warn will only benefit the wealthy rather than the poor. And as we have long noted, while the state is to blame for failing to provide resources and employment to huge swaths of people before, during, and after the pandemic, capitalist over-accumulation is really at fault. Yet they instead point their fingers towards the unhoused, calling in the state to uphold its carceral promises of containment. So such anti-houseless and anti-leftist politics, we can actually see kind of going further back to the 1970s and 80s in California, when prison expansion sought to satisfy the overaccumulation of speculative capital and to warehouse largely Black and unemployed workers who had lost blue-collar defense industry jobs following the cutbacks and the evisceration of Keynesian social welfare programs. And this is what Ruth Wilson Gilmore writes about in The Golden Gulag, for those who have read her work. And so for doom loopers, as I'm calling them, the populations threatening the safety of the quote-unquote old San Francisco are valuable ammunition to advocate for a new prison fix, which seeks to solve the crisis of capital overaccumulation through geographical expansion and development. Doom loopers, stepping into this tradition, aim to fix the problem of poverty and houselessness by ousting and replacing leftist policies and left-leaning politicians with new machinations of the police state. And so, like, she and others were part of this move to recall San Francisco's abolitionist district attorney and replace him with this kind of tough-on-crime new one, right? And so, I'm just kind of skipping here. Oh, okay, this is Henry Miller, I forgot to show you. But I'm gonna skip to him and say, so basically this prison fix very much lines up with the politics coming out of this YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard movement, which probably some of you have heard of. But it again, right, it seeks to solve this problem by developing more housing, market and luxury housing, and celebrating trickle-down economics, and it understands that the lack of housing to be the reason for the houselessness crisis. In this sense, the very existence of surplus populations not adequately housed or incarcerated is fuel for real estate speculation, as if new market rate housing being built would be affordable and made affordable to those dispossessed through cycles of eviction, gentrification, and the carceral state, and we know it's not. And so, for those who don't know, YIMBYism initially formed in San Francisco. It was initially called this group called SF-BARF. They formed the Bay Area Renters Federation. This isn't a joke, but BARF.
Yeah, she did.
BARF. No, that was their acronym. Here's one of their early slideshows where they actually I know you can't read all this writing, but this is when they formed, and their whole goal initially was to disrupt this alliance between rent control advocates and affordable housing advocates. They thought they could do this like in 4 months or something. But it was this sort of divide and conquer technique. Now they are this huge, party that has chapters all over the U.S. and beyond. And is very much tied up with the state. We've got Scott Wiener and others really pushing for all these policies to kind of build our way out of these so-called crises rather than actually fight for affordable rents and for anti-carceral politics. But instead we've got this project, and I wanted to kind of close by kind of losing my notes here. By talking about, two things. One, YIMBYs and NIMBYs, I think both we know are not our friends, right? And NIMBYs call the cops on us. YIMBYs are kind of pushing for people to also be contained so that they can build their new projects. And I do think this is really endemic to the problem of liberal urbanism. And I wanted to actually just turn back to this amazing article by the After Echo Park Lake Research Collective, because they actually note, very rightfully so in their article, this is your quote, not mine, that the distinctive regime of liberal urbanism that contours Los Angeles, like San Francisco, where the promise of housing accompanies displacement. They write, like mass homelessness, carcerality is not an aberration within liberal urbanism, but one of its key features as it exemplifies the relationship between property, personhood, and police that is foundational to liberalism. So here they turn to the problems of property and the impossibilities of resolving its inherently violent logics of dispossession with solutionist approaches to houselessness rooted in its property logics. And so I'm just wrapping up. 1 minute, sorry. But I see this akin to Michele Lancione's important intervention in his new book for a liberatory politics of home, in which he argues that as long as housing requires the negation of the unhoused, we remain trapped in an endless cycle of avowal and disavowal. Put differently, why push for futures in which the unhoused are housed when the very bedrock of housing is so violent and rooted in imperial, racial, and heteronormative constructs of personhood? And so while this all might sound kind of impossible to overcome, I did have this conversation today that I just want to end with. I was talking to a housing organizer in San Francisco who I have known for years. We were talking about the current national political climate, everything that probably lots of us are thinking about. And she made this kind of interesting point that what we're seeing the state find, the kind of carceral state find hope in right now is actually the YIMBY project. She noted that YIMBYs and doom loopers saw the housing justice initially as the strong multiracial, intergenerational movement, much more powerful than they were, and much more powerful than their primarily white tech worker demographic. They wanted to disrupt and fragment it, and so naming housing justice organizers as NIMBYs, which they've done, while pathologizing unhoused neighbors allowed them to, or so they thought, drive a wedge into a project that has now become national. But the sheer fact that they saw the movement as so strong to begin with is a good reminder that it has and continues to be powerful, and that their wedge will never be fully concretized. So by continuing to do the work that we've been doing all along, that of building community with neighbors, friends, and comrades, both housed and unhoused, and by fighting the forces of racial banishment that continue to haunt our liberal cities, our power endures. So I'm gonna leave it there.
Thank you for that. Next up, we have Annie Powers. Y'all can give Annie a round of applause. Before and after. Thank you.
I will actually take dim lights. I mean, the pictures are just really cool. Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Annie. Just really quick, I'm an organizer with Union de Vecinos, which is the East Side local of the LA Tenants Union, and the downtown local of the LA Tenants Union, which actually meets here every Wednesday, 7 p.m. If you live in downtown or know someone who does, homeless or housed, please come through. Okay, sorry, organizer. So I study the history of unhoused people's political movements in the United States. I am writing my dissertation on the National Union of the Homeless, a formation in the 1980s and 1990s that achieved quite a lot. And I would say changes many of the classic historical narratives about those decades. I can't really get into all of that, but I'm gonna share a slice of their story to kind of show that despite narratives about the death of the left after the 1970s, the Homeless Union shows us that the struggle continued, but to see it, you have to turn your focus to urban land as the site of organizing. And you also have to understand unhoused people as political actors and engines of history.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with the political biographies of two key Homeless Union leaders to kind of show the connections between those movements of civil rights that we hear about and the growth of this union. So the first is Willie Baptist, pictured here on top in the early 2000s. Willie grew up in Watts, and in the 1965 rebellion, he talks about learning a lot from the revolutionary possibilities and limitations of that moment in Watts. The National Guard routed away from Vietnam to squash the rebels in his neighborhood, but it was only temporary. They went right back to Vietnam. So the experience pushed him to organize a Black student union at Pepperdine, which was then in South Central. They developed a free breakfast program, which was based on that of the Black Panthers. And from that, the group was recruited into the 3rd ever Venceremos Brigade to Cuba to learn about the revolutionary process there. While in Cuba, Baptist met a North Vietnamese woman who shot American fighter jets out of the sky. When he asked her what he and his comrades could do in solidarity, she pressed them to organize a movement of the poor in their own country. The belly of the beast, baby. So Baptist heeded the call, and upon his return, he joined a formation that would become the Communist Labor Party, the CLP. The CLP came out of both South Central LA and the Detroit Revolutionary Workers Movement and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, if you've ever heard of them. And the CLP was distinct from many other organizations at the time. It built on Marxist analysis and practice emerging from liberatory movements across the Third World. As Baptist put it, quote, unlike many of the other formations, we didn't come out of the student movement. We had people like me who were working class, who came out of Watts or the Chicano Moratorium, and we had the position that we work amongst the most exploited and most oppressed. Because of that focus, CLP organizers were on the front lines of the changing economics of late 20th century neoliberalism in the US. So CLP organizers essentially witnessed their members lose jobs and eventually lose their homes in the late 70s and 80s. And they continued to organize around those changes, even as things got really desperate. So Baptist joined with very legendary welfare rights activist, Marion Kramer, and together they led the CLP's Survival Committee, which ultimately supported some of the growth of the homeless union. Okay, so I'm gonna turn now to the second key leader, Chris Sproul, who's here, this picture below. He's here organizing, helping support the organization of the homeless union in LA, which is why I picked this one. But so Sproul was incarcerated in Rikers Island as a youth, and he remembered getting out and immediately being organized into a picket line of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. By 1964, Sproul had become chairman of the Lower East Side chapter of CORE, where he led sit-ins and rent strikes to demand habitable, dignified living conditions for poor people in the neighborhood. So some of Sproul's very first political experiences organizing were around this intersection between civil rights and economic justice in the form of housing. When the Harlem Rebellion erupted that same year, following the murder of a Black teenager by NYPD, Sproul and CORE were well positioned to organize through that insurgency. After the rebellion, he appealed a loitering charge that he received after distributing bilingual flyers against police brutality. All the way to the Supreme Court, he takes it before it gets denied. He then moves to Long Island, tries to run for local office in the 70s, and repeatedly tried to face down and then failed to win against Black Democrats who got their power by selling out poor Black people. So increasingly disaffected from politics, by the early 1980s, Sproul lost his business and his marriage, and he wound up on the street in Philadelphia. But he carried his organizing experiences forward. After witnessing a woman be evicted from a homeless shelter he was staying at for being physically incapable of sitting still in the chair that they gave her to sleep in, he fought back. And although he was himself evicted, he recalled that he regained his dignity in the process of beginning to struggle once again. I just want to pause here because this point is super important. I'm a TA for a class right now taught by Robin Kelly on nonviolence and social movements. Someone in the class asked, like, isn't it true that people who are like very, very oppressed and poor can't really organize? And Professor Kelly said, no, that's not true. But I think, yeah, Chris Sproul would agree, right? Because it's not only that they're able to organize, it's that it's vital that they organize because struggle, fighting back, is part of what makes us human. And for people systematically dehumanized, struggle is thus doubly important. Okay, so anyway, so Sproul and two others started the Committee for Dignity and Fairness for the Homeless, which developed a place called Dignity Shelter, the first ever homeless shelter run by and for unhoused people. Residents at the shelter required political participation. And so part of that is they would organize these different tactics like bathe-ins in the city fountain to demand showers at Philly city shelters. They won. And so these basic things that are in shelters today, as awful and bare minimum as they are, those things are the result of struggle. So they're able to win some of these basic rights. That experience leads him to imagine the idea of a homeless union. He gets hooked up with CLP member Bob Brown, connects with Willie Baptist. Willie Baptist moves to Philadelphia and with Sproul, and this is sort of a big part of the birth of the union. I just want to say too about the birth of the union, like, it took so much legwork. Like, it took months and months of visiting shelters over and over, organizing those people, following up, organizing the shelters, organizing the encampments, following up, passing out flyers, passing out rolls of dimes to people in different encampments so they could coordinate by payphone. I just want to be very clear because I think as we talk about building this type of power again, like, it's that relentless organizing that is what it takes. It's what it took for them. Okay, so I can't tell the whole story of the homeless union right now, obviously, but I want to talk about their most significant tactic, which was nationally coordinated building occupations. So from Detroit to San Francisco, Chicago to LA, DC, Baltimore, Boston, all over the place, unhoused people broke into and took control of vacant property, both homes and empty lots. This is one occupation on an empty lot, and here's a bunch of homes. All of these, like the property that they occupied was owned by HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So just to be clear, at the same time, all across the country, and in many cases like multiple places in the same city, unhoused people would break into empty homes, all owned by the same landlord. So for those of us in the tenant union, it's easy to imagine the pressure that put on the landlord, who in this case is the federal government. So many of those occupied vacant units were in public housing. Those public housing units had been emptied by local housing authorities in an attempt to justify demolition. In Detroit and Chicago, which is where these pictures are from, the homeless union met with organized public housing tenants who were themselves fighting against the vacancies and against the demolitions. And in fact, their solidarity was so threatening, like it was at Echo Park Lake, I would say, that the state often retaliated. In Detroit, the housing authority attempted to evict an elderly woman who allowed homeless union members to use her lawn and telephone. She won her eviction, but revealed to the newspaper that she believed it wasn't just retaliation related to the homeless union, but because she had been fighting for years with fellow tenants against the demolition of the projects. So although the state attempted to divide housed and unhoused using these tactics, public housing tenants and the homeless union united to preserve public housing and transform it into the dignified, habitable homes that they intended it to be. Yeah. So, I know, it's very exciting, actually, to see on this slide. No, it is.
Unity, yes.
It is. And yeah, united together, those precarious public housing tenants and homeless people shared interests and built power. And I would say that that's a class of landless people waging struggle for control over land and their lives and their futures and all of our futures. And they won. They won a lot of major land concessions from federal and city governments in several cities across the US. Again, story for another time. But in 3 cities, Oakland, Minneapolis, and Philly, the union won control of major housing developments. The fate of these housing projects is ripe with lessons for those of us organizing for control of territory in LA today. Each of them, over time, transformed into the very kind of nonprofit slumlords we see around us in downtown LA today and we organize against. So it just begs the question, what kind of political organization must we develop in order to protect ourselves against the co-optation and de-radicalization of the homeless industrial complex? And there's a bunch of other reasons in addition to the co-optation that the homeless union declined, but again, another talk. So although they did decline by the mid-90s, I would say their legacy lives on, and as we think about the world that faces us now in LA, with the Olympics looming and attempts to eliminate the poor from downtown Los Angeles proceed, I want to encourage us to think with the homeless union to consider how we can escalate the struggle in the places we already live. Even as things appear bleak, which they definitely do, the story of the homeless union is cause for a lot of optimism. It points us in new directions, toward a long radical genealogy that survives into today, and to a long future as organizers for liberation of the land and the people, even and actually probably necessarily in the hardest of times. Thank you.
So I feel like I just have the one question, and then we'll just open it up. So something that was interesting when I was looking at your presentation, Annie, as well as Deshony, I'm really thinking about the time period. I'm really thinking about the 1970s, 1976. I'm thinking about the defunding of HUD. I'm thinking about the HUD budget is slashed from 29 billion to 17 billion. I'm thinking that was during that time a wave of gentrification. And I bring this up because we rarely, this is what I love about this, we rarely talk about that time now. We talk about like contemporary gentrification, but we don't talk about the conditions that they were going through was a result of inflation, the prison industrial complex. It was the rise of the homeless industrial complex, right? And so knowing that, and then looking at a Scott Turner at HUD today and thinking about the ways we know the definitions around housing and houselessness are going to shift away, even further away from care. And this is for anyone. This is for all y'all on the panel. What should we do? Right? I know that's both rhetorical, but it's real. Like, what should we do? Right? Yeah,
Is it
just
on?
grab it. Yeah, for sure. It's hot, but it ain't gonna be a hot ride.
Is it on?
We can hear you.
Sorry, you just have to join an organization and organize. It's so annoying. Like, there's nothing, like, it's not always fun, but it's like that commitment is the literally only thing that's gonna get us anywhere. And so I would say, you know, join your local tenant union or other organization that's fighting for the liberation of the land.
Someone else? Give it up, give it up. Yeah, give it up. This is my only question. I want to hear from all of y'all, because I'm gonna open it up.
Yeah, same. Organize. Organize, and I think part of what I'm learning in my organizing, as well as sort of the histories of struggle in LA, is that we must kind of connect housing and policing in our work. I think that was spot on. One of the first things that I learned when I came to Skid Row, to learn about organizing. And I think if our work isn't deeply tied to eradicating militarization and policing, then some of the victories we might get to remain in place might be stifled from efforts towards martial law or other forms of policing our community. And yeah, I think if we have to tie policing to housing and then changing economic relations in our organizing and making those connections. I think that's the only way, and I find that we might be doing things a little siloed. So I think we just need to come together more, talk more, so.
Yeah, I'll echo the sentiment that folks will need to organize, and I think really to pace themselves and to prepare for a lifetime of struggle and figure out what that means for them. And luckily for myself, over the last few years as a member of the Tenants Union, I've gotten to feel like a part of something that's really historic and really important, and it's how I know so many of the folks in this room. And there was years before that where I was just putting one foot in front of the other and organizing where I was and organizing badly, ineffectively, alone sometimes, and just trying things out. So I would say, like, organize where you are, commit to a movement, commit to making a lot of mistakes and being disliked and getting it wrong. Write things down a lot, I would say. Sorry, I'm like acting like you guys are asking me for just general life advice, but this is what I'm a poet. Write things down, and I think it's really easy to forget the things that we learn and have to learn them over and over and over again. So for myself, being able to commit to an organization has meant being willing to fail and look stupid, do things wrong, make enemies, and learn hard lessons over and over again. And overextend myself, volunteer for too many things, have to learn boundaries, and then realize, like, I can get stronger and surpass them. So I would say there's a lot of just personal, relational, and organizational work that goes into that.
Did you want to jump in on this? You should.
Okay.
All right.
Is this on?
We're here.
My mic sounds nice.
Okay, I can't. Thank you. I mean, I just want to second everything everybody said. I mean, organize, and I think something I've been talking to some students about lately is that we can find a lot of joy in organizing and build community. And I know sometimes it's just like the hard, like nobody wants to do this work, and people do need to do that work. The unglamorous work needs to be done, but also like I think we do. I mean, this speaks to what you're talking about in terms of pacing and sustainability. A lot of my closest friends and people that I consider family are people that I've met through organizing, and I think that sometimes we forget that. And when these crises kind of seem to take hold of us and people kind of retreat and feel really alienated, I think people just are going online and just trying to figure it all out online. But I think you really got to get, if you're able to, off the phone, off the computer, and actually show up in meetings if you're able to. But also, I think what you were mentioning about some of these struggles getting siloed, I think we do need to, like, particularly abolitionist organizing and housing justice organizing does need to come together more, because it's the cops that are coming to houses and evicting people. ICE is coming to houses and tearing people out of their homes, and then people are ending up in detention centers, and so it's like these struggles are all connected, and I think we're in this moment of really needing to build some of those kind of connections. So I'll second that too.
Word up. Yeah, so I mean, I told you, now I feel like I got so many more questions. So I do have another question though, because we're talking about organizing, and we're talking about the process of building an organization. We're talking about systems, we're talking about structures, right? We're talking about resources. And at the same time, we're talking about those resources. We also know that we are going to get direct hits from the federal government. They're coming after Black leadership, they're coming after brown leadership, they're coming after anyone who's trying to protect people. They're coming, it's real, they're here, right? And so in that climate, what is it that we need to do to withstand, COINTELPRO 2.0, like whatever you're talking about? And so we're talking about just organize, but what is it? What's the types of relationships that we need to create now to withstand that, which is going to divide us, right? There's a million balls in the air, we're gonna chase them, right? And so what would be that say? I'm gonna start with you, Lupita. What would that be? Because you got the sage advice. Like, what would that advice be that would tell us, like, yo, this is the glue that we need to establish right now, when we know everything is in the air, when we know division is the tactic, right? When we know all the things that we've ever done might not be enough, we need to do some different shit, right? What would you say to us?
Well, I think that question has been on my mind a lot because we recently started a new local within the LA Tenants Union, which is the Echo Park local. And formerly, LATU organizing in Echo Park was a part of a bigger local that was made up of multiple neighborhoods. And so there's a lot of momentum that was happening for years, but the decision to create something sort of new, like a new organization, has taken a lot of work. And I want to shout out a lot of folks in the room here that have committed to that, like Joel and Carlos and Gabby and Chelsea and Carla and I'm sure I'm missing people, I'm sorry if I am, but one thing that has been, one advantage that we have, those of us who organize in the tenants union or in our neighborhoods, is that there's like oftentimes really deep relationships that we get to lean on, and it's not organizing with people that we're meeting for the first time, although that happens too. Lupi, who I read about in my poems, and who was one of her struggle was one of the seeds that helped start the new local. She's fighting her eviction from the oldest house in Echo Park, where she's lived for the last 62 years. But I met her about 8 years ago when she was my neighbor, and she was just like the lady on the street that had yard sales every weekend. And I worked at a museum and would give her free tickets, and she would give me discounts on the clothes. And so years later, when her mom died and the house went up for grabs and a developer started trying to get her out, it was easy to kind of jump into action together because of that, because of what we shared as neighbors and as friends. Gabby's in this room, and I always brag because she's like one of the coolest young people that I know, and she was my student before, by the way.
Stand up, Gabby. We
Yeah,
want to
stand
see
up,
you.
Gabby.
We want to see you. We're going to put you on. Please shout out.
Yeah, but Gabby's born and raised in Echo Park, and I met her when I taught at an after-school program. I taught her little sister, and she was too radical and like got me demoted from my post because she was like, fuck the police, I want to learn an abolitionist curriculum. And so I was like, I gotta do what Gabby says. But like years later, now we're organizing together in this local, and then each of these people that I'm naming like has all these worlds and all of these relationships and histories that I, as an organizer, get to like enjoy and join. And so I just want to name that it's been a lot of work, and I like what you said, Annie, about like it's such a beautiful metaphor to me, like the rolls of dimes to get the payphone to even make the call that is needed before any of the organizing happens. I feel like we've been really bogged down in our local with just getting some of the basics going, but then I think all of that like love and relationship makes it so that we have to be accountable to each other.
100%. Anyone else want? Yes, come on now.
Hi. I'm like knocking over my empty cans over here, which are not beer, they're mate, which I'm way more addicted to. Anyway, okay, so I think I just want to share about I'm thinking of two examples that we can turn to for also like what the character of the organizing is and like some of our horizon around this stuff. I think one of them is the past, whatever, I'm a historian, but in the United States even, there's so many histories of like, things have been so much worse than they are right now, like in the history of the United States. And like, I think we get really caught up in like how fucked up everything is, which it is, and they're doing it on purpose so that we get stressed out by that. But like, I'm just saying like in the Great Depression, there was like a tremendous amount of neighborhood-based organizing, which is just like on that very block, like there's a place where people who are unemployed are hanging out, largely unhoused. There's people who are facing eviction on that block. And then when the sheriff comes, just all the people come to the eviction, and they're able to stop evictions in Detroit and Chicago for like a little bit. And it's like, you know, it's not forever, but it's a great example. And I think what's really significant about it, well, a couple of things. One, it's like a tremendous amount of risk. Like, there's a story of, this organizing was all multiracial that I'm talking about, and there's a story of a sheriff coming to evict a family. I think this is in Detroit, and it's like 4 people like kind of stand up to the sheriff, who's pointing a sawed-off shotgun in their face and saying like, I will kill you if you don't move. And they just said like, do it. And I think like, you know, I mean, whatever, we're very timid in the United States, I think, about what the reality of the risks that we have to take to like do some of this shit is. So I just want to encourage us to like think about our own past in that way. Also, not a coincidence, all of these evictions were like organized by the literal Communist Party. So it's like, that's like the history of those politics also, that these are like explicitly radical people who are doing explicitly communist organizing in order to stop these evictions. And I think then also the other example to which we can turn is today, and it's like the revolutions that are ongoing around us. I'm thinking about in Venezuela, where I and you know some of my comrades here, we visited 2 summers ago, and to be honest, it's just seeing the organizing that LATU is doing, the tenant union is doing, but like 30 years advanced. If we had a communist-oriented process to rewrite our constitution and give us the right to land. Because otherwise it's like really this, it's neighborhood-based, it's fixing shit together, it's like growing food together and distributing it on the block. It's like, it is truly the same kind of neighborhood-based organizing we're doing. It's just that, you know, they have a revolutionary process that they're in, and we also need to get there. But yeah, I think to me, it's like just like there's so many existing examples, and it's really easy in the US to feel like we're so special and that this moment is like so special. But I think it's like the state really wins when we have no historical memory of like the stuff we've already gone through, but also the stuff that's like going on now. So anyway, I think, yeah.
Anyone else before I open it up?
I've been thinking about risk for a while. So that earlier when I had that question about capacity, I think, that's what I've been getting at, or what I'm getting at. I think we all have to transform our relationship to land. So of course, these neighborhood practices, but really kind of checking our own complacency and our buy-in to some of this. We do have to go offline, which also means go off 501c3, go off PhD, like activist knowledge. You gotta, go off like the outputs of academia or the outputs of 501c3. We gotta talk to people in our community. I think what's important to highlight about Ted Hayes is that not everybody's a communist. Not because communism isn't important, it very much so is, and we all should learn and adapt. But our communities just don't have the same politics that we're talking about in this room. And I've learned from door knocking and talking to people over time and keep having conversations with people that ideas and situations help illuminate more to the picture for folks. So it's not like this is gonna happen right now, we're gonna organize, or everyone's gonna adopt a certain politics. This is a decade's struggle. This is you enlisting yourself into struggle. And I think when I came to Skid Row and learned from Pete, Debbie Burton, all these Skid Row activists and residents, I learned that that's what I needed to do. I needed to enlist and struggle and be a part of that. So when I organize, I'm doing work in coalition, but again, the outputs of academia or nonprofit industrial complex are part of it, which means somewhat I'm offline in my commitment or my potential co-optation, or perhaps even narrowing the agendas of movement. And so we have to be critical, and at the same time, I recognize the spaces that we can create. Within academia, but I think we have to really create some principled practices.
Might as well.
I'll just say, no, I mean, I've been thinking too about, if I'm thinking about San Francisco, there are so many housing justice nonprofits there that are all getting funding from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which just decided to cancel its DEI. But the thing is that there are autonomous tenant groups, and they've been so marginalized, and it's really, I think, the time that we need to recognize that that's been so unproductive, that marginalization. And up in Seattle, I recently joined the Puget Sound Tenants Union, which is part of the Autonomous Tenant Union Network, which is very much anchored by Latu. And so it's been kind of fun being in that space. And we just were reading together Abolish Rent, which I know it takes place here in LA. And so I think that there are that sort of networking across these kind of autonomous spaces, which has such a long legacy and a history if we think about solidarities internationally and locally. And it's, I think now's the time for that, so that, these kind of cuts from wherever don't take us down. So, I think the going off the 501c3 is real. So, yeah.
Getting off the branch. Questions? And then, the question is like a string of words with a period at the end. Like 6 or 7 words.
Yes.
With a question mark.
First, I want to thank all of you for all your brilliance and all your documentation that you have brought. But you have missed one important part that's been very vital to me. When I was homeless and helpless and hopeless, people beat the shit out of me, and I lost my dignity, my pride, and my shine. But what got me well was art, was music, was theater. That's what brings our community together. It moves our heart to start. And so I want each one of you to think differently, to think about how we can unite our community with the wellness of music, with the healing power of singing. That is God's gift. Art in the heart It's what LAPD does. It's what John has been doing for 40 years. It's what Hike does. It's what we all do with Peace by Peace. And so I want you to think, how can you incorporate in your organizations art, music, theater, poetry? Those are the things
Right,
that make
is that the
me.
question?
And
How
the
can
question
y'all
is, how will each one of you...
There it is, gotcha. Just saw when you stood up, I knew it was gonna be a paragraph.
Yeah, how can each
Here
one
we
of
go.
you, now that I planted the seed for you to flower and to breed, to give you the power to organize so we can have unity, because when we are divided, we fall. What will you do differently now that I have planted the seed so that you can breed art and theater and music?
See, that might be an assumption though, because we started the whole thing with an artist and an organizer, so
We were listening to them, they were talking about organizations, about tents and stuff. I'm just asking, I would like to just see more of that. I would like that to be a lead point, that's all.
all right.
So how do you feel about
getting head nods. Do we have someone who wants to address that quickly?
I mean, I could write 1,000 books about the homeless union. Like, there's so much stuff going on, and one of those things was like, they had such a robust practice of art. Like, the founding of the New York City Union of the Homeless, they opened with a rap about how everyone had to get back to the shelter and how the conditions were like jail. Like, they're having the same conversations we are, right? But yeah, it's like that was so integrated into their practice.
All right.
But I'll incorporate into future presentations.
Thank you. Much love, much love.
Oh boy, and now we got Ananya throwing lives over. Is there another question? All right, Leonardo.
Yeah, one of the things I wonder, how can we build the correct practice without the fear of ideology? Because, for example, we're talking here about the idea that, not everybody thinks the same way. Well, not everybody hates the police, but we organize in our communities to fight the police. Not everybody is a communist, but we're trying to organize socialism and collectivity and anti-capitalism. So I'm just concerned that when sometimes we're afraid of ideology, we run away from the real practices that we need to develop. So when the organizer thinks ahead of time what the people are going to think, we're not organizing. So how do we move away from the fear of ideology, from anti-communism, and of the history that the United States created that makes organizers afraid of engaging the people in a real struggle to change the conditions in society?
How do we do that? Deshony, I think you were touching upon that.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I was saying, Stop LAPD Spying, where we're at is pretty clear. So when we meet, Stop LAPD Spying, it's in the name. But when we're organizing and doing door knocking, we're getting a lot of different things. And I think we need to just expose more of us to actually talking to people and not necessarily being in certain kinds of meeting spaces. So over, say, where we're organizing right now in Watts, for now almost 2 years, we met a Latina pianist, and she told us like, hey, the cops are good. They helped me move over here. They've been helpful. And then when we saw her again 8 months later, she said, actually, there was a stabbing near me. And the police didn't even show up. And she changed.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. This is like, means to be somewhere and be doing the work consistently. And like what we're all saying. And talking to people on a regular. Which means we're not always on our phone, although they're helpful, social media. And in these spaces, which we need to do. But then on the Saturdays or on a Thursday night, you knocking on doors and you talking to people, and it's not to vote. It's just to be like, how are you living? What are you experiencing? How can we come together? So, and again, it's meeting people there, not necessarily like, do you know about, so-and-so communist? You know what I mean?
But why? Why is that an issue?
Why is what?
Yeah, I mean, why not learning about other socialist, communist struggles in other places?
I think that, organizing has phases that are decades long.
So we can eventually?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm telling you where we at right now, some of the organizers I'm doing it.
I got one more for y'all. We got time for. You have a question?
I don't want to ask you.
Go ahead.
Well, okay, so I think each of you, in a way, addressed the fact that there is a risk aversion in the United States
Yep.
that I also absolutely recognize in myself in terms of like doing actions and like putting yourself on the line, doing the kind of thing that you described with standing in front of the sheriff with a shotgun. And I think one of the biggest things for me has been like, how does one dig oneself out of that rut of aversion to risk, whether it's physical risk, whether it's, you know, the loss of anything really in the course of putting yourself on the line politically. And because I was struck by the contrast that you illustrated between your travels and like organizing here. It's like, how do we approach that kind of daringness without, on the other hand, you said something about extending boundaries, like without like destroying ourselves. That's what I'm struggling with, is like how to become braver without decimating oneself. I'm curious.
I think this relates to our question too a little bit. So I'm thinking of the MST in Brazil, the Movimento Sem Terras. And like they have this practice called mística, which we do in Unión de Vecinos, which is kind of like the spirit of the struggle. It's like you can't really put your finger on it necessarily, but it's like evoking the love and also like the long, like we're all a part of this history of struggle. And that's like so beautiful actually. And it's like, the thing that's so great about the mística is it like connects you, it's like it connects you to God, it connects you to the spirituality, it connects you to like, it is such an honor to be in this fight. And like, it's an honor, it's a historical duty. And I think like the more we can kind of cultivate, I'm like literally giving myself goosebumps. Like, yeah. I think the more that we can like cultivate that like, that kind of like familial relationship with the people around us in our organizing, and like that's it. Like that's like there's like almost like if you're the transformation that happens in you in the process of doing this type of militant organizing, I think it's like when you do all this stuff together, it's just easier because you just feel like, I don't know, you know, it's like it's for something. It's not just like throwing your body and getting arrested over and over for nothing. It's like you know that sacrifice is for this much bigger project. And I think it's also on all of us as organizers to build the kind of spaces where people can like feel that, right? Which is what the mística is all about.
Anyone else? Lupita.
Yeah, there's this Diane DePrima poem where she's talking about like you need to go out and like learn how to shoot, and you need to like train and get strong, and then she like switches it up and she's like, but don't get uptight. It's the mantras and like the love that we give each other that's really gonna take us over the edge, right? So it's like a little bit of both. And I grew up like with a lot of fear and a lot of like the mantras in my head were like, don't talk about that, don't tell people, like what happens in our family stays here. And it took like just the love of my friends like gently pushing me past and past and past over and over again. And I feel so brave now, you know? And we had a protest, and hopefully I get braver. But we had a protest with a bunch of tenants from Mohawk Street where we went to Beverly Hills to protest outside of the landlord's mansion. And for a lot of people, that was their first protest. And it was something really kind of vulnerable to just like go put yourself out in Beverly Hills like that. And it was a couple of weeks after everything happened at UCLA with like the cops attacking protesters, so everyone was just very on edge. And I remember Lourdes, who's like the matriarch of the building, like prayed to God and asked him to like put something in our path if we weren't meant to like go and protest. And then this like crazy Zionist came and was like yelling at us, and we were like, and she was like, no, that's not the thing. And like there just kept being obstacles, and she was like, no, but I don't actually think God put that one there. And so we just like went and did it anyway, but she led us in this really big prayer. And I feel like just making the space for the fear and like letting ourselves like ask for that sign, and then just deciding like, fuck it, we're all here together anyway. To me, it reminds me of like how I've been able to overcome my fears.
Yes, bravo.
Thank you. So, everybody join me in thanking Lupita, Deshony, Erin, and Annie for their love, for their wisdom, for their passion. Thank you guys so Standing ovation. For sure, if you've not joined an organization, join an organization, join an organization.
Yes.
Join an organization. Thank you, LAPD, the other LAPD, for hosting us. And thank you for everyone just coming out on your Friday night and flipping off the phone.
And